like a river attendeth my way. Oh, and sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot, you have taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Oh, it is well with my soul. Oh, it is well with my soul. Oh, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ has regarded my helpless estate and to shed his own blood for my soul. Oh, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Oh, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. Oh, my sin, not in part, but the whole, was nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Oh, my soul, yeah, it is well with my soul. 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 Oh, it is well with my soul. Yeah.
We have been having this conversation about restorative justice. And I think one of the things that is challenging about this conversation is that I think we're pretty bombarded by how rough the world is. I mean, I think about the last 5 years of my life and then all of my years before that. I'm probably more aware of all of the terrible things happening in the world and in my community in the last 5 years than I have been in all of the years before that. I mean, you open up wherever you read your news, you open up your social media, the need for justice, the need for restoration is right in our face. The challenge is, as a Jesus follower, if you were to open up the teachings of Jesus, the 4 books of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that had the teachings of Jesus and the messages from his earliest disciples, and you crossed out all the places where Jesus invited us to be a part of things like restoration and justice, there wouldn't be much stories left, would there? So as a Jesus follower, I feel this tension inside of me, this like massive problem and this really small me. I feel this, I can't just disengage and say, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I don't really care about restoring the world. I only care about me. That's really hard for me to do. But I also find it really hard to look at the world around us and feel like I can make any difference at all. Do you feel this challenge? Do you ever feel that in your soul, like where it's just easier to dismiss the injustices in the world than it is to engage? When we look at the earliest followers of Jesus, Jesus lives and he teaches and he, through his alive years, he starts generating this following. But when Jesus died, there was nobody there. As you read the story, I think sometimes it can be a little bit challenging. And so, here's a hot take. The life of Jesus was not all that inspirational. I mean, honestly, it wasn't inspirational enough to have anybody around him at the cross. People weren't willing to lose their lives for the things that Jesus said and taught. But post Jesus' resurrection, the Spirit of Jesus finds its way into people's lives. And what was so inspirational about the early church that caused it to boom was a group of people who were laying down their lives for the restoration of all things. It was actually the earliest followers of Jesus that gave credibility to Jesus rather than Jesus himself. As people were incredibly compelled by the way this group of people were reordering their lives to restore the world, they began asking, what's this all about? And they said, it's this Jesus guy. Can I tell you about him? And so I think as we think about what it means to be a church, to be a faith community, to be a group of people centered in the way of Jesus, we can't simply ignore the challenges of the world. We can't simply ignore the injustices that exist all around us. And so if I could kind of say this plainly, is that we have experienced injustices in our own life. And so I would say that the things that have happened to you, that Jesus wants to heal what's going on in you and awaken you to the injustice around you and heal our world through you. But it's important to remember that we are not called to be saviors of the world, but to engage in the work that Jesus is already doing. One of the greatest stories of liberation we have in the scriptures can be found in the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is this story of really this hero named Moses who stands up to the most powerful ruler in the world at the time and says, hey, I'm here to take all of these folks that you have enslaved, my people, and I'm walking away with them. So the story of Moses really starts in Exodus chapter 3. What we often skip over is that there were 6 women before Exodus chapter 3 that were heroes. See, Exodus chapter 1 starts with this powerful leader, this Pharaoh, who's starting to get insecure about the Hebrew people that he had enslaved, that their people, their population was growing. And he starts to feel like, man, if I don't do something about this population, they might get organized and take me over. They might get organized and put an end to this. And so he goes to Shua and Pua. There are these midwives, these women. He says, listen, what you need to do is that when men are born, when baby boys are born, you need to take their life immediately. Well, Shua and Pua, these Hebrew midwives, they don't do it. They don't do it. And so Pharaoh is so angry. I mean, he is livid, and he calls Shua and Pua to account. And one of the things I love about the book of Exodus is there's all these little kind of like jabs at the Egyptian people. And they say to the king, oh, no. The Hebrew women are stronger than Egyptian women. That's what they say. They're having babies before they get there. They don't even need our help, so we weren't there in time to take their life. And so he gets so mad. That he says, all right, every young Hebrew boy needs to be killed. We're going to take all of the Hebrew men, all the boys, and begin to try and erase this population. These attempts have been made throughout history, if you're following the narrative of our world. And there's this mother named Jochebed. She has this boy, and she just can't do it. And so she hides her son, who ends up being Moses, for months, until he's too big and too present, and she can't hide him anymore. And so he takes her son, and she wraps him in this kind of basket thing and puts him into this river. And says to her daughter, Miriam, I want you to stand watch and make sure that our son, Moses, is going to be okay. And Moses floats down the river and is picked out of the water by Bethiah. Remember Pharaoh, this evil ruler? Bethiah is his daughter. She finds Moses in the water and pulls him out and decides she's going to even stand up to her father and raise this son as her own. But then recognizes that she didn't have the child, so she's going to be unable to nurse the child. So in Exodus chapter 2 enters the 6th heroic, simple, very present move by a woman in the story, as she finds a Hebrew woman to come and nurse Moses to age. Another shot in the Exodus story is this. The story suggests that actually this Hebrew woman was his mother. Another jab at the Egyptian people, saying, look how strong we are. Look how God is on our side as we do the work of restorative justice. See, I think we could read a story like the Exodus story and think, man, Moses must have been so courageous. Man, God called Moses to do this absolutely huge thing, but what about me? I don't see myself like Moses standing up to the most powerful person in the world and marching God's people out of slavery. I don't see myself in that story. But you might see yourself in the story of these 6 women, because sometimes restorative justice is interceding like a midwife. Sometimes restorative justice is protecting like a mother would protect her child. Sometimes restorative justice is keeping watch on someone in danger, like an older sibling keeping watch over their sibling. Sometimes restorative justice is rescuing someone from a terrible situation. Sometimes restorative justice is nursing someone to health. Restorative justice is not about being a hero that gets talked about on social media. Restorative justice is about seeing what's in front of us and doing something about it. Restorative justice is about seeing the ways your world, the world that you engage with, is not right, and taking steps, sometimes very small steps, to push back against it. Moses is who the story is about. Moses is an example of someone doing restorative justice. Moses is not the only example. I think this checks out throughout Scripture. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, we've been talking about this teaching, the beginning of it for the last couple of weeks, kind of framed in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the, and Jesus goes through and talks about maybe some of his special people in the world. But then Jesus breaks into some parables, some images to help us understand what it is to be Jesus-centered people. This is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5. He says, you are the salt of the earth. He says, if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. Can I just say, Jesus probably didn't know about Michigan roads. Right? He probably didn't know that the salt can still be useful to keep cars on the road. He says, what use is it? He says, you are a light. You are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand and shine it on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people so they can see, get this, the good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven. I mean, this is what took in the early church. I mean, we're talking about 100, 150 people max who are doing good things. I mean, they are doing good work. They are restoring the community among them, and they are being restorative in the community in which they are placed. And people are noticing the good things that are happening and say, I want to be a part of that. Tell me more about that. Because you know what I think? I think the longing for a new world exists somewhere in all people. Somewhere in all of our souls is this desire to see the world be a more just place, to see the world be a more welcoming place to all people. It's somewhere inside of us. And when a group of people live into that reality, it can pull people into that community and say, why are you like this? And the answer to that question for this early community was simple. It was Jesus. Jesus centered their way of life. And they wrestled with what it meant to be followers of Jesus in their context. See, they could see the world that Jesus imagined, but then their present reality didn't look like the world Jesus imagined. And so as they peered in to the world that Jesus described to them, and then they lived in their current context, they began to try and make this world look and feel a lot more like that world. The people of Jesus in this time were a bridge between both places, gazing into this space and trying to restore the place they were. James, the brother of Jesus, wrote some letters. Actually, if you're a Bible reader, there's a book in there called James. It's 5 short chapters. And this was letters that were meant to be circulated around to a lot of different churches. And James is kind of doing 2 things with his book. He's trying to write a little bit like the book of Proverbs. He was Jewish, and so he wanted the book to feel like a collection of Proverbs. But he wanted to do it at the intersection of Jesus' teachings. So he said, listen, if we had a book of Proverbs based on Jesus' teachings, this is what the book would look like. Some really creative work. And so James says this in James chapter 2. He says, my brothers and sisters, what good is it if people say they have faith but do nothing to show it? Claiming to have faith can't save anyone. Can it? He asked. Imagine a brother or sister who is naked and never has enough food to eat. What if one of you said, go in peace, stay warm, and have a nice meal? What good is it if you don't actually give them what their body needs? In the same way, faith is dead without works. He says, how can I see your faith apart from your actions? Instead, I'll show you my faith by putting it into practice in faithful action. It's good that you believe that God is one. Ha, he says, even the demons believe this, and they tremble with fear. Are you so slow? He says. James can be a little bit cheeky in his book. Do you need to be shown that faith without actions has no value at all? What does James' message sound like? Salt that's lost its saltiness. Sounds like a light hidden under a basket that no one can see. James is saying, hey, if you want to engage the world around you, your faith has to have some action to it. It's got to have some meat to it. I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not sure how that lands, but the point is that when we invite Jesus into our lives, we also invite his way of life into our life. That inviting Jesus into our lives is not just a heart thing. It's a change my life kind of thing. It's an engaging in the work that God is doing kind of thing. What Jesus longs for is to awaken us to the healing that needs to take place in the world around us. Yes. Awaken us to the healing that needs to take place through us. Yes. And awaken us to the healing that needs to take place in us. Yes. It's all of us. It's all of it. In us, through us, and around us. I've been I've been reading a lot about different groups that have seen maybe social change happen in their world. As I wrestle with what it means to be a follower of Jesus, my brain wants something practical to do. I want to understand, like, what can I do about the injustices in my world? What can this actually look like? And I came across this organization that has worked with different communities through significant social change. And this organization, they would say that for social change to happen in a community, there's got to be this, like they call it, a whole ecosystem of people working in different ways. I mean, listen to how large this ecosystem is. They're saying, listen, if you want to see social change in your community, some of you need to be like weavers, weaving together the different people doing different work. Some of you need to be experimenters, trying new things, experimenting with different ways to create change in the community. Some of you need to be frontline, first responders, showing up in times of crisis. Some of you need to be visionaries, communicating with the larger group, the larger body about what we can see and what might be possible. Some of you need to be builders. I mean, boots on the ground, putting together systems and structures and creating things that actually help us move towards this shared future. Some of you need to be caregivers, taking care of those on the front line, taking care of those who find their way into your community looking for reprise. Some of you need to be disruptors, standing up to the systems and structures that are continuing to cause this harm to happen. Some of you need to stand in that place. Some of you need to be healers, coming alongside those and creating spaces of healing for those most affected by these injustices. Some of you need to be storytellers, telling stories of a new world that is possible, creating an imagination in people that change is even possible. And some of you need to be guides, coming alongside of people and helping them find their place in this ecosystem of change. It takes so many different kinds of people to enact real change in the world. Nobody is on the sidelines. Everybody has an invitation to be a part of the good work that Jesus is doing. This concept is not a secular concept. Actually, Paul talks about this in the book of Ephesus. The book of Ephesus was meant to be shared with churches all around a region. And Paul had the opportunity, you think of a time, like there was no email, there's no social media, so all these churches are emerging in all of these different places. Paul was one of the few people who traveled from church to share wisdom from that place with this place. To say, listen, you're going through this situation, that church went through that a month ago. Let me tell you what they learned and how they figured it out. And so Paul writes this letter to all these churches in Ephesus. And he says to them, some of you are apostles. Apostles are these people who are willing to blaze into new territory. I mean, apostles, maybe you can imagine this. This is the person in your life who's pulling out the water pistol and charging the gates of hell. Right? Some of you need to be apostles. Some of you need to be prophets. Prophets are speaking truth to power. Prophets have this radical courage to say, come at me. I'm going to stand in the gap between the people you're harming and you. You're going to have to come through me first. And then Paul talks about pastors, and this is like a co-opted word in our culture. These churches didn't have paid pastors. These churches were likely 3 or 4 family groups gathering in a household. Pastor was something that burned inside of you. It wasn't a job you went to school for. He says, some of you are pastors. Or maybe even a better translation would be, some of you are shepherds. This would have rung clear, especially in the Jewish imagination, of people who sometimes had to protect sheep, sometimes had to feed the sheep, but they were always giving their life for the sheep. Some of you are going to need to be pastors, a restorative presence, and protectors of your community. Some of you are going to be teachers, giving words that we can live by. Teachers in our midst help us keep the center at the center. And some of you are going to be evangelists, another word that I think has been co-opted in our time. This is not about people standing on a corner screaming at people, telling them they're going to hell. This is actually not about people who are necessarily super articulate on telling the story of Jesus. Evangelists were like rescuers. Evangelists are like somebody who's reaching into the Nile River, pulling out a child and bringing that child to a safe place in community. Evangelists are people who are consistently out in the world. And most, like the best evangelists among us, are the people who have experienced the restorative justice of Jesus in their own life. And they can't help but be in the world, be with among other people, say, listen, I've been there. I walked through what you're walking through. My story, it follows your story. Let me invite you into a new story. A story where a group of people are gathering around the person of Jesus with a mission to restore the world, with a mission to heal our world together. That's who the evangelists are. Some of them are good with words. Most of them are just really good at finding people who need to be rescued from the water. I want to tell you about this story I heard about Amy and Ben Wright. Amy and Ben Wright are the proud parents of 4 children, Lily, Emma Grace, Bo, and Biddy. Lily was born with autism, and Biddy and Bo were born with Down syndrome. Did you know that over 80% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are unemployed nationwide? The Wrights look at that because of their proximity to suffering, said that's not okay. That's not right. I mean, surely this is not the world that Jesus imagined. And so they started a company called Biddy and Bo's Coffee. And it creates a pathway for people with disabilities to become more valued, accepted, and included in every community. The original shop they opened was in January of 2016 in Wilmington, North Carolina. It employed 19 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Amy and Ben would say, as advocates for the value, acceptance, and inclusion of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they've dedicated their lives to making the world a better place for their children and others living with disabilities. Can I just say, for a business like that to start, in their community had to be some apostles. Had to be somebody who's coming along and saying, you know what? We can do something like this. Oh, I don't know if we can do anything about that. No, we can do something about this. Among that community had to have been some prophets, some people that would stand up to the things that people think about these people they're serving. There were some prophets that would speak up and speak truth to powerful narratives that shape our community. Among that group had to be some pastors, some shepherds, caring for these families that would come in to the coffee shop, caring for the families of these employees. Among them had to be teachers, giving this community words to live by, helping keep the center of things at the center of things. Among them had to be some evangelists. Like, did you hear about this coffee shop? Did you hear about the work they're doing? Did you hear about the things that they're doing, the people they're serving, and this new world they're creating? You see, the rules that they play by seem to be different rules than we're playing by out here. Did you hear about them? Today, Biddy and Bo's Coffee has grown to 19 shops across 11 states with over 400 employees. This is the power of restorative justice. This is the power of the presence of Jesus. This is the power of a community of people saying, we don't all need to be heroes, but we all have a role to play with what's right in front of us. I learned about this story because I strolled into Biddy and Bo's Coffee Shop. They just opened one in Ann Arbor. Because I'm a sucker for black t-shirts, I bought this one. Church, our world is a tough place for some people. And the work of restorative justice, this conversation we've been having over the last few weeks, is not something we can just brush by and claim we're followers of Jesus. It's certainly complicated, but that's not a reason for us to disengage. In fact, I think it's a reason for us to lean in and ask ourselves, what is the injustice that is right here in front of me? How has God uniquely created me to do this part of the work? And the church can become a place where we're all connected with each other, where apostles are meeting prophets, and prophets are meeting pastors, and pastors are meeting teachers, and teachers are meeting evangelists. And the work of Jesus becomes this ecosystem of change, both among us and in the communities we live in? What might God be inviting you into? Let's pray together. God, we couldn't possibly solve all the world's problems, any of us, by ourselves. But Jesus, I pray that you would continue to give us an imagination for what is possible and an imagination for how we might join in the good work that you're doing. I pray for the apostles among us that you would give them dreams of new things that we can do. I pray for the prophets among us that you would give us the courage to stand up and speak truth to power. I pray for the pastors among us that you would magnetize them, that people who need to be cared for and shepherded and loved would find their ways to these individuals. I pray for the teachers among us that you would give us words to live by, that you would help us to keep the center of things at the center. And I pray for the evangelists among us, that they would not be caught up into the narrative of what the church might call as an evangelist, but they would be able to find people in our community that are needing rescue and bring them to safe community. We pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.